Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block: politics, perspectives, and players. COVID-19 began making international headlines in mid-January after China announced its first death of someone who had contracted the virus, and reports that the virus had spread to Thailand and Japan. Author and journalist Ethan Liu recently found himself at the center of the outbreak. We reached out to him to hear his story. Take a listen. Ethan, you recently wrote about your visit to China to see your grandfather. When did that visit take place?
So it was just a little before the start of Chinese New Year, and I think, in my view, it was a little before everything escalated. So the day before I left, the coronavirus was in the air, but for example, in the Globe and Mail morning newsletter, there were just two lines on the matter and one cartoon. And so while I was in the air, I think everything escalated. When I arrived, Wuhan had been sealed off, and I just saw a very surreal face of face masks just looking at me. Everyone in the city was wearing a mask, and I think from someone who lives in the West, that is a very jarring thing to see.
What did that feel like? You're hearing very little about the virus when you take off, and then by the time you land, you're landing in a place where the human geography was very different than you'd seen in previous visits.
Yeah, it felt very surreal. It felt as if I was stepping into a different world. And so I did grow up in Singapore, and I remember the SARS crisis. So it's not entirely foreign to me, but it's definitely something I haven't seen in a long time.
How much did you know about coronavirus before you left? You said you were reading about two lines in the early morning newspaper, but did you have any sense of how serious it actually was?
Yeah, I think I knew very close to nothing. I like to think of myself as someone who reads the news, and I'm a very avid reader of the Globe. But in the morning newsletter, just two lines, and I did not think it was anything that was that important at the time.
You're also someone who is very well read, yet it seemed that so many of us have been taken by surprise. Was it limited information coming out of China, or what do you attribute that lack of knowledge to?
I think there are probably a lot of factors, and I think one strong factor in that is that China had been accused of covering it up. So this thing broke out in Wuhan, I believe, sometime in December, and it was only sometime in January when the wider world got alarmed, and it was only very recently, I think maybe last week, that the Western markets were affected.
When you arrived and got on the ground and you see all of these face masks, describe to me a little bit about what your experience on the ground was like.
Right, so this was quite possibly the last time I'll see my grandfather. So his health had been worsening over the past year. So it was quite important that we go to the old folks' home to see him. And quite unfortunately, they were extremely discouraging visits. And every time you're in the old folks' home, you have to put on a face mask. And after the first visit, they told us it's best you not go anymore. And right during the second visit, my family and we got kicked out of the seniors' home, told never to return. And so that was the first day of Chinese New Year. And I think the situation just got a lot more serious since that day. And so we were back in Beijing a couple of days later, and I think I basically lived like a prisoner, like in one of those maximum security prisons where you're inside for 23 hours a day, and you go out 1 hour a day to work out. That was exactly what we did at this university where my uncle teaches. Until one day, that university campus got shut down as well. They tripled security at the gate, and they just told us we could not go in. And that was life in China.
What was the moment when it crystallized for you, when you realized just how serious the situation was?
Oh, it kind of crystallized right when I arrived. I think the delta between like what I was feeling and what I was seeing, because to get landside after you clear Chinese immigration, there's an unusually long barricade. So basically see a lot of people pressed against it to receive the travelers, and it was just a very surreal wall full of face masks. It's like when you watch V for Vendetta, all those people with all the masks, just expressionless but telegraphing something dark.
What did that feel like? This odd displacement of people and masks, but also the fear of the virus compounding that as well. Were you afraid of getting it?
Me personally, no. And I guess I've never been very concerned about such things, and I think I'm a fairly healthy young man. And the death rate for people who get it in my age group is under 0.5%. But I did worry about my grandparents. I think if one of them gets it, they'll just die. And my parents especially, they worry also that if there's something wrong with my grandparents, they might not be able to make it to the hospital. There might not be whatever they have might not be prioritized because everyone is dealing with coronavirus.
When you were in China, what was your sense on the authorities and whether they were being transparent about what was going on? Did you feel that they were sharing information?
I'm not really sure how to speak to that because admittedly, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the coronavirus even when I was in China. I was still consuming all the same news as I would in Canada, and yeah, it's hard to say. I do know that there have been accusations that the authorities weren't transparent with the information, and as we can clearly see, this issue, it became a big deal to the wider world only in January, and whereas it had been raging in Wuhan for quite a while.
You were able to see firsthand some of the infection control methods that Chinese authorities were trying to put into place. What did you make of their efforts?
I think it definitely it shows something about China. All those efforts that we see, they are something that only China is capable of. It has both the resources and the sort of tight central government control to make it happen. For example, when you go to a restaurant in Beijing during the height of the crisis, they would just ask to check your ID to make sure you're not from Wuhan. And for a while, the telco companies rolled out this feature in which you will text this number and the number will send you a list of provinces to which you have gone. And that really shows that the telco companies, they are tracking your phone number. They know where you have been. So the concept of personal privacy, I guess, it's a very different idea in China than what we are used to in the West. And I think this coronavirus really made that aspect more prominent.
Was it difficult for you to get out of China and get to Singapore?
Not at all. I already had a return. I had an onward ticket from China, but I did run into some complications on the day I left. That was because I was supposed to go to Hong Kong before I was in Singapore. I was supposed to be in Hong Kong for a day. I was supposed to visit a friend there, but it turns out that friend, he was in the US, and because of the coronavirus situation, he decided to just skip Hong Kong. And then the day I was supposed to arrive in Hong Kong was the day before they were going to quarantine people coming in from the mainland. So somehow my flight got canceled, and I did not know until I arrived at the airport. And there was quite a lot of chaos and pandemonium at the Air China ticket counter. I think I'm not the only one who had his ticket canceled without his knowledge. And, I saw people crying, and there was a couple trying to get out of China to go to Canada. They were just asking the guy, do you have any tickets to Canada at all? So because of everything at the counter, it took me 10 hours before I was able to be on my way to Singapore.
What advice do you have for people who want to travel or have plans to travel? What do you think about traveling right now in this environment, given everything that's going on with COVID-19?
I think I will still say yes to traveling. I myself am traveling as well. So this itinerary, I had it booked long before this thing happened. I'm supposed to be in Germany starting from tomorrow, and I will be in Germany starting from tomorrow. But I do think, if you're thinking of visiting one of the specific areas that were hard hit by this thing, perhaps you should reconsider your plans.
Ethan, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us. For the West Block, I'm Mercedes Stevenson.